What's going on, guys? Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to show you how to do an oil change on a 2020 s1000rr and up. This is a k67 model, and it should be the same for an m1000rr. At the end of the video, after the oil change is done, we're going to show you how to reset the service light using a GS911. All right, so we got the bike on the lift. The first thing we're going to do is we are first going to take off this right side lower panel. There is 8 bolts that you need to take out. There is one here. You can see that right there. 1, 2, 3, and there's one on the bottom in the middle. 4, and you got 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those are all T25s. The drain plug bolt is a T50, and it's right there. Now all the bolts are the same except for this one, and the top one up here. Those are just a little bit longer and they have like a little thicker part. So just remember that when you're installing it back into the bike. Now after all the bolts are out, it literally just pulls right down like so. All right, we got the panel off. Now we're gonna start the bike and get it to operating temperature. Usually I like to let the bike warm up, to almost like 200 degrees. And you just gotta be a little careful when you are draining the oil because you could possibly, get some minor burns. But, if you're wearing some gloves, you should be okay. The reason why we took off this plate first is because this way, right after we shut off the bike, we can drain it. And then we're not worrying about, when we're getting off that panel, possibly, touching the pipes and burning yourself. So we'll go start the bike right now. All right, we loosened up our bolt. Now I'm going to get this one out. Just be careful, because you're gonna have the crush washer and the bolt coming out. I'm gonna unscrew this by hand for the most part. And then I'm gonna grab it. Oh, and I dropped the bolt. I'll grab it. All right, so I'm letting this drain. I'm gonna take out the top cap as well. We took off the top part right here. It does have a O-ring on there, so just make sure that it is on there. If not, it may be stuck like right around here, but yeah, so we're gonna let this drain for probably, I don't know, at least a half hour. Next thing that we did was we emptied the oil into a container just to get rid of most of it, just so that if the lift was moving or I moved this or hit it, it's not gonna go all over the place. Now we did clean up the drain plug and we got all the stuff off there. This is the cap for up there. We're gonna put our new crush washer on and we're gonna put the bolt onto the oil pan. Make sure you clean off the threads and the oil pan first before you put this in. All right, so we screwed it in by hand as much as we can. Obviously, since there's a new crush washer on it, once you start to tighten it, you will feel it crush it. And according to the manual, you torque this thing to 28 Newton meters, which is basically 20.65 foot-pounds. And you can do 20 pounds and you'll be fine. So make sure you don't go over that. And she's torqued. Next, to make sure we don't get any oil on the pipes, we're going to put an old shirt over here, and then I'm actually going to get some tin foil and kind of shape it so that when I start taking off the oil filter, I can let it drip onto it and it's not going to get onto the pipes. Now obviously you want to make sure that the pipes are nice and cold before you end up putting a rag or something over it. I think the tin foil will be fine, but if you're putting a rag like I am, you don't want the pipes to be hot because obviously you don't want the cloth or any material to burn onto the pipes, especially if it's titanium. Now I'm going to use this nice little wrench that I got to loosen the filter, and I'm going to let it drain out. What's nice about this wrench is that it's pretty small and tiny, and you have plenty of room to maneuver around to loosen this up. Now that we loosened it enough, you can see we're going to slowly let this drain out and go into the oil pan. So while this thing is draining, we're going to turn this thing to the right, like so, and pop it out. just so that we could get this out of the way, so we have a little bit more room for the oil filter. Next, we got the oil filter off, and we just tilted it to the side to make sure we could get any excess oil out of there. Now, some people that have some exhaust may have issues getting it through here. If you have that problem, you might have to, loosen up this part right here and just press down on the exhaust just a little bit, just to be able to snug it in there. I've heard some people say that, but for some reason, maybe it's just the way my pipes were made, it ends up fitting through here. So I'll go grab this out now. All right, so we have the oil filter just sitting on the rack right now. You do have to take off this little metal bracket right here. That bolt is a T30. And the top part you have to pull down. All right, so what I did was I just pushed this up out of the way, and now we're going to squeeze the oil filter out in between these spots right here. Be careful not to scratch your exhaust. We got our hands on the filter. Just gonna turn it sideways, and out she goes. It's gonna be a little tight up in this spot. Just be careful, like I said, of the exhaust. It's better to push it against this little bracket. You could actually loosen the bracket if you want, but I got just enough room, and she comes right out. So we always stick to the BMW OEM oil filters and the BMW oil, which is 5W40. So now I'm gonna pour a little bit of oil into here, move it around a little bit, and then I'm gonna take some oil on my finger and rub it around this rubber gasket part so that it's nice and moist, so that when you tighten that onto the block, it doesn't seize up on there. Also, make sure you clean the threads around the hole and this big round part over there that the oil filter mates to, because you want to make sure that is clean as well. You can see we have a little bit of oil on there, and obviously we lubed up the ring as well. That's nice and good. Now we're going to put it back onto the bike, slip it in between here. Like I said, you could actually move this bracket. There is a little bolt right there, and you could take that out for more clearance if needed. So I did loosen up this bolt a little bit. It's a T30, just so I have a little bit more wiggle room to move this around, just to get a little bit of a better angle when I'm putting it back into there. Next, push it in there, get it against the threads, and then lightly tighten by hand. You want to make sure it bottoms out onto the engine block. All right, so we snugged up the oil filter by hand as much as we could, and then I used the tool just to snug it up a little bit. Usually when it's hand tight as you can get it, it's good. Obviously, you'll check for leaks. Now, before we start putting this bracket and this bracket back on, I'm gonna get some WD-40 and clean off the pipes to make sure I didn't get any oil on it. All right, we put WD-40 on our pipes with a rag and we wiped it off. Now we're going to put this bracket back in first with this longer bolt. That's a T30. Just make it nice and snug. Screw it in by hand first, because obviously you don't want to strip the block. Make sure it's in by hand. Screw it in by hand as much as you can. Then use your wrench. I did not end up taking this small part out. I did on the top. So once that's back in place, I'll just push it back up into the ground. All right, so we got that nice and snug. Just make it pretty snug with your hand. You don't got to go crazy. I'm going to do one last cleaning before I put this bracket on. All right, so we tightened this T30 bolt back. So that's where that needs to be. We made sure that this is nice and flush with the engine case, as you can see. And now we're just going to actually move the cable all the way. So I'm just going to pop that back into there like so. And this piece has to go in here. So you gotta line it up so it goes in the hole. And then once you get it in there, turn it left to lock it into place. And then that part is all done. All right, so now since this is all into place, I'm just gonna add 1 quart to make sure there's no leaks. And then I'm gonna add 2 more for a total of 3. Then I'm gonna put half of the last quart for 3.5 quarts. And then we'll see where it is on the sight glass. For the most part, if you fill it up to the top line, and then after you start it, it's gonna drain most of it, because obviously some has to go into the oil filter. And from what I found, at least the way that I do it, it took 4 quarts exactly to get it where I needed it to be. All right, so we got just about 4 quarts of oil in. Keep in mind, this is with an oil filter change, and the fact that, you know, I let the oil drain for probably like an hour just to make sure that I get any of the old stuff out. So now we put the cap back on, and we're going to start the motor, and you're gonna see this drain. All right, so we just shut it off, and now we're gonna wait. It is normal for the pipes to smoke after using WD-40 to clean it. This was after about a minute. You can see that the oil level went back up. But obviously we want to get it a little bit past that center mark, maybe like 3/4 of the way of the housing. All right, you can see the oil has settled right exactly at the halfway mark. If you put the cap back on and you put this down on the ground and leave them there for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes, the cap will basically almost fill up with oil. Now I'm just gonna add a little bit more just to get it to that top line right there. All right, so after putting those little cups in, it got it basically exactly where I want it to be. Now we'll go plug in the GS911. Use your key to remove either your seat cowl or your seat. Next, release the cap for the plug right here. You push on this side and on the other side as well, and it pulls right out. Next, you plug your GS911 into the port right here. All right, we have our GS911 plugged into the computer. I'm gonna go to the program. This is a year old, more than a year old. They got to update it, okay. So now we're gonna go to S series. You can perform auto scan. You could do a whole bunch of different things on here, but anyway. So first thing, we're just gonna change the oil light. So we go to S series. All right, so it wants to run tasks. All right, that's done. Now we're gonna go to s1000rr k67 2019 plus. Please switch on the ignition. Just gonna click enter because it's on OK already. Go to special functions, set service reminder, click on that. Now it's going to tell you your current information. So we're actually going to set it for, I like to do every 3,000 miles. Some people do 6,000, some people do 2,000, do whatever you want to do. But I like to do it every 3,000 miles. That's just how I do it. So now I'm going to choose custom date mileage. So we're going to change the mileage to 10,000. And as you can see, it's in miles. So 10, 1, 2, 3, 10,000. Go to apply. And all right, it is all set to go. All right, so the new mileage and the date is all set. Obviously, I turned off the bike with the key, and now we just unplug in, that's it. Yeah, pretty simple, just unplug that, unplug this from here, and plug it back into the little slot where it came from. So before I put the side panel back on, I'm gonna actually clean the whole exhaust just to give it, you know, a one-over rub with WD-40 and a clean rag, just to keep the titanium in good shape. I do gotta say though that titanium makes some beautiful colors. And that's basically the main reason why I don't have one of those longer belly pans, because I want to see those beautiful blue and purple colors that, you know, the bike ends up making. All right, guys, so hopefully this video was helpful. These how-tos are great, and it's not really that hard of a job. Some tips and tricks that I would say is definitely take off this bracket before you get the oil filter out. It would just be easier. I was able to do it no problem, but it does give you some good clearance. Some people do like to remove the oil filler line, and you can do that, but something where oil is going through, I'd rather just leave it be and not have to worry about it leaking. It's not leaking now, so if I don't touch it, it's not going to leak again. It's really not that hard to do it this way, but I mean, just to take off a bracket with the screw, in my opinion, is a little bit safer, I guess. I mean, either way, you could put this back in no problem, but that's just the way I do it because I didn't want to mess with this oil line. Definitely make sure you check everything to make sure there is no leaks from the oil filter itself. If it is, you'll probably have to tighten it up a little bit more. Make sure there's no oil leaks on the oil drain plug. And, you know, when you're putting your fender back on, just make sure you go over every bolt and make sure that it's nice and snug, because obviously you don't want to lose any of the bolts. Other than that, it's a pretty simple process, and you could save some money by doing it yourself. So thanks guys for tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you in the next video.